Hello, Mr. Will. This is Jupiter from HashKey. So a little bit on myself, I'm doing research, responsible research work of HashKey Capital via a Web3 venture firm. So today we are very glad to invite Glenn and Mr. Will to join our Fireside chat. Our today's session regarding the Soulbound tokens. So a little bit of background regarding Mr. Glenn. He is the author of Decentralized Society Finding Web3 Soul. So, Glenn, you got quite a lot of attention from Web3 Society recently because of that famous report. So before we officially talking about social bond token, could you give us a little introduction about yourself and also your recent research interest? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor. I have a background as an economist. I was a professor at the University of Chicago for some years, and I've been at Microsoft for the best part of the last decade, where I've been a researcher. I've led the development of the company's Web3 technical strategy, and now I'm incubating Web3 research for the company. I also wrote a book called Radical Markets that became fairly influential in the Web3 space and led me to collaborate very closely with Vitalik Buterin, who worked on that paper with me. I founded something called the Radical Exchange Foundation, which is one of the leading think tanks in the Web3 space. Right now, I'm working on a new book called Plurality that's trying to describe a new paradigm for technology and society together that tries to reimagine the future of technology being around cooperation across social diversity rather than either sort of pure markets and capitalism, the way that a lot of the Web3 space is, or sort of top-down control, the way that the AI space tends to be oriented.
Okay. Nice to hear that. So obviously your press works more on the economic side. So why do you get a little attention to the Web3 spaces, especially to the social bond token, this topic? I think this topic is quite new recently, and your research work has been raised a lot of attention from the crypto communities. So could you introduce a little about in which way Web3 interests you, and in which way you can do more utilizing your current research work? So yeah, a bit about that. Thank you.
So I got into this space because of that book, Radical Markets, as I mentioned, which, among other things, proposed a new way of voting called quadratic voting, which allows people to express knowledge or strength of preference by expending more tokens, but also downweights large expenditures so that it's not dominated by an oligarchy or by the extremists. And it does it in a way that's optimal from the perspective of economic theory that leads to the best possible social decisions. But that economic theory has some pretty strong assumptions. First of all, it assumes that you know who the people are, that you can determine them, which is getting rid of the whole Sybil problem. That's a big thing in the Web3 space. And it also assumes that everyone is selfish and acting in their personal interest in a completely rational way. And neither of those assumptions, really works out in a lot of practical applications. And as we've worked on applying quadratic voting, which is now widely used in the Web3 space, we realized that we needed better foundations to both to address the Sybil problem and to address the broader problem of the fact that people often cooperate and collaborate and don't just act in their selfish interests in ways that aren't captured by the mechanism. And soulbound tokens really grew up as an attempt to address that problem. They have a much broader range of applications than that, but they originated as a way to represent people's social connections, their social affiliations, and to take those into account when we work on voting systems and we work on identification.
Okay, got it. So yeah, I think quadratic voting is quite useful tools for the crypto community, especially for the public good allocation. So let's talk about social bond tokens. So can you explain a little bit the details regarding social bond tokens and how it can solve some problems that Web3 industry has been facing recently? So a little bit of that. Thank you.
Absolutely. So soulbound tokens are non-transferable, at least initially publicly viewable, revocable by the issuer tokens. So they're very different than an NFT, which can be transferred between any two wallets at any time. Soulbound tokens, as a result of this, allow you to build and maintain persistent reputation, social relationships, connections. They build a social foundation for Web3 rather than just a financial and transactional foundation. And I think this is really critical because ultimately, almost all the value that is traded financially comes from a social foundation. So if you think about the companies that are traded on a stock exchange, their primary assets have to do with the people that they have, the culture that they have, and the way that those people relate to each other. If you think about most housing is rented out. And those rental relationships are not just transactions, even though they have a financial element. You don't just let anybody rent. It has to do with the trust the two sides have in each other. And none of this stuff can be represented in a purely financial way. You need a social foundation and then the financial things built on top of that. And I think a lot of what's missing in the Web3 ecosystem is a result of this absence. We don't have uncollateralized lending because there is no notion of a person that can offer their reputation or their credit. There's only assets. We don't have DAOs that really work because we're forced to use coin voting because there is no notion of a person that votes, just a wallet that votes. So I think so many of the limitations of the Web3 space come from the fact that it either doesn't have or it outsources to Web2 primitives, things related to humans and their non-financial relationships to each other.
Yes, totally agree. So nowadays, Web3 has been facing a lot of problems that like the real users. Maybe more than 50 of the wallet address is from bots addresses. So it's very hard for the project itself to capture the real attention from the real users. And also we lack a lack of credit system that can, good people can get cheap loan interest or get a better treatment. So that's something that quite lack of in Web3. But another, I think the vertical that in Web3 we pay attention to is anonymous. So do you think social bond tokens have a conflict with anonymity? So how do you think about that, relationship? Thank you.
Well, first of all, Web3 is not anonymous. It's never been anonymous. It's always been pseudonymous, right? People have persistent wallet addresses. They might have potentially multiple of those, but they have them. And there's all kinds of ways in which certainly governments and security agencies, but even firms like Chainalysis have managed to tie many of those wallets together. In fact, there's a beautiful paper that recently came out that for the first 2 years of Bitcoin showed that the average person who was in the top 64 holders of Bitcoin had 1,000 wallets that they were using. And it managed to tie all of those wallets back to the same person and undermine this wallet splitting strategy. So it's never been the case that Web3 was really about anonymity. It was about pseudonymity. And I think pseudonymity, the difference between pseudonymity and real names is actually greatly exaggerated. Because the reality is that your quote real name is not your real name. It's a legal name that's recognized by some government somewhere that was given to you by parents and so forth. And you can just think of, at least in the Western tradition, your first name is like a token that's given to you by your parents. It's a soulbound token. And your last name is a, social affiliation token associated with your family, right? The reality is that that's like one slice on who you are. But if you had in a pseudonymous record, like all of your health data, but not your name, that's another record of who you are that represents a lot of who you are. And if you had all your transactions in another one, but none of your health or your name, that would be another representation of who you are. So the reality is, I think this distinction between pseudonyms and real names is very misleading. The reality is we have different representations of slices of who we are that are presented in different social contexts. And the key is that you can accumulate over time a persistent record, but that doesn't necessarily have everything about you that can be presented and staked, not that whether you have your legal name on it or not.
Thank you. Very interesting explanation regarding pseudonymous and autonomous, and also very thoughtful thinking regarding our names. So another topic regarding social bond token is maybe the decentralized identity, so-called DID. So DID has been Web3, has been introduced into that Web3 for many, many years, I think from 4 or 3 years ago. So also last year, we see many projects doing very splendid work on the DID. So how do you think about the decentralized ID and what's its relationship with the social bond token? Thank you.
So DID and soulbound tokens are both related and potentially complementary, allied approaches to building a Web3 native identity. There are some important, differences in terms of the technology, but probably more important is a difference in terms of the basic attitude that the two communities bring to building. So DID is off-chain. It's and the data is stored off-chain, and the root is usually stored off-chain, though sometimes it can be stored on-chain. So the underlying identifier. DID is intended to be, not all implementations are, but it's intended to be private. So it's intended that someone issues you one of these tokens, and then you choose who and what part of it to reveal to other people. Whereas in a soulbound token, the default is that it's public for everyone to see. And then, of course, you could put privacy on top of that. So these start from kind of two ends of a spectrum, one being very private, one being very public. And there are trade-offs between these things. So one thing that is, you almost certainly wouldn't want to use a soulbound token for, at least initially, is like health data. Because health data is not something you'd want to have out there publicly, unless you completely decouple it from anything else that identifies any other element of your life, and it's in a separate wallet, and it's just the bundle of the health data together. Maybe then you'd want it to be public, but generally, like these very private things, you would not want to be in soulbound tokens. On the other hand, it would not work well at all to have credit or like signing a petition or something like that in a DID, because it's private and selective. So you're getting that token is in no way like a commitment that you're making publicly to support something or to take an action. The whole reason why you have a credit score that other people can see is that then if you take a loan, you're bound to repay it, because otherwise it'll hurt your reputation. And if you have the right to selectively show or not show that to anyone you want, it completely undermines the purpose of a credit score. It undermines the purpose of making a public promise to do something. It undermines the purpose of making any sort of signature on a campaign, et cetera. So those are two extremes. The reality is almost all the applications we want should be in between these. They should be things that are visible to some people, but not to others, under certain conditions with certain social decisions. And those are systems that we're just starting to build today. We're starting to think about how we can get to those. And I think you can do those starting with soulbound tokens, but adding zero knowledge features on top of it. Or you can do it with DIDs, but adding sort of co-posting to limited blockchains on top of it, more permissioned or et cetera. So I think we're just at the beginning of exploring how we really support a rich diversity of ecosystems of social participation in this space. And I think both DID and things that start on chain are interesting starting points to build that.
Well, there's split in that explanation regarding the EID and social bond tokens. So another question is, nowadays we see many projects being interested in social bond tokens. And do you think social bond token should be unique to one person? That means one person only have one social bond tokens, or one person could have more than one social bond token? Because there are many, for example, this chain, for example, chain A has its own social bond tokens. Chain B also has its own social bond tokens. And there's no way to prevent a user to collect two social bond tokens from two chains. So what do you think about the future of social bond tokens? Should be they collect into one unique social bond tokens, or one person can have multiple SBT tokens?
Well, so let me be clear. First of all, for sure, everyone should have multiple social bond tokens. The whole idea is that people have many different markers of their identity and that it's not a single thing. But there is a question of whether a single person should have multiple collections of these. So different souls. Souls are the roots of soul-bound tokens. They're like wallets, but they're not quite wallets, because eventually we imagine a different process for generating these wallets and dealing with key recovery. And I'm happy to talk about that. But basically, you can think of them as like wallets. And the question is, should one person have multiple of these? And my guess is yes, but probably not a very large number. Probably maybe 3 or 4. Covering different aspects of their lives that they don't want to interact with each other. But you will want to have a wallet that has many of them, because that will increase your credibility. So on the one hand, privacy leads you to want to split them. On the other hand, credibility leads you to want to join them. And maybe eventually there's some interesting zero knowledge way to like partially join them, etc. So I don't think we fully understand the future privacy landscape here, but I think in the near term, probably people will want like, somewhere between 3 and 10 of these wallets, but not more than that, because they'll want to have a large number of tokens all in the same wallet, because those together will represent something like a resume or a CV that will be a record of the things that you've done and be the foundation for you to make commitments and attestations and get credit, etc. And if you don't have enough in the same one, you won't have that credibility. You won't be able to pass Sybil tests, etc.
So Glenn, I think my last 2 questions regarding the first is, what do you think the biggest use case for social bond token? I think that is the biggest question that common users have when this concept is being introduced. So you have been addressed this in the previous topic, but could you give more details regarding that? Thank you.
I think that the nearest term applications are probably going to be people making commitments that an NFT is scarce, that they're not going to issue more of very similar NFTs. Second would be credit, so uncollateralized lending. And the third would be Sybil protections. And maybe a fourth would be KYC. So those applications we're already seeing pretty large scale implementations. So I'm pretty confident those will happen soon. Probably the most prominent has been that Binance is now doing all its KYC through soul-bound tokens starting this week, actually.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, we see a lot of projects is planning for their soul-bound token project. Maybe see more project mature maybe late this year or early next year. So my last question is, for the social bond token directions, what's your next research plan? Will you bring any more exciting research work regarding social bond token? Thank you.
Well, the main thing that I am focused on is building things around it, not really focused exactly in this area. I'm writing this book called Plurality, which will explore a lot of the applications of these ideas and the things that we can build on top of them. So I think that will help develop the space. I'll also be applying these myself as part of the book. As we write the book, it's going to be written in public with participation from the community, managed through soul-bound tokens. So that will be an application that I'll be developing. And then I'm doing a number of other things that are, again, around it. It's around this notion of different types of information structures and how we can allow social control over information related to this privacy issues that we were talking about. So those are some of the things that I'm working on right now.
Okay, excited to see your books and research papers in the future. So I think I have run out my questions, and today is very excited to talk with you, Mr. Liu, and also have you to join our Wanxiang blockchain Fireside chat sessions. So yeah, I think our audience will be well known regarding social tokens after listening to our sessions, and it will be exciting to see more projects bring this concept into the reality.
I'm looking forward to interacting with you all and building with you. So thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, looking forward to cooperation in the future. Thank you. Thank you for your time.